All right, folks. So I'm going to quickly talk about a couple of things that involve Seattle because, I have people that, since I now live in Tacoma, people want to talk about Seattle still and ask my opinions about it and all of this. And a lot of folks don't want me to quit talking about Seattle because they find the information that I give helpful. And that's really my goal is for people to find the information that I have helpful. But there's a couple of things that and again, I don't know if I actually published this video. A lot of times I will make content and not actually publish it. Um, and so then I go back through and I'm like, I'm not sure if I actually did a video on it or not. But this video talks about housing and transit in Seattle. One of the core issues that I find um, I guess troubling is that Seattle's housing and transit are basically well behind the city. It hasn't kept up at all with demand. And I think the city really and truly created that issue and made it even worse, to be honest with you. A lot of the housing in the city, when you look at a lot of the older apartments and things like that, um, are far out, from the city core. And then when you look at those apartment buildings, they're like 3, maybe 4 stories tall. And then some of the newer buildings that are built that looks all boxy and kind of like they look like a Rubik's Cube, basically. Those buildings are only 6 or maybe 8 stories tall, and they're built somewhat far away from the light rail system, right? When you go to Vancouver, it's a completely different situation, right? Along the stations, you have a cluster of apartment towers or condo towers, or even possibly office towers. They build everything right by the stations. And literally, if you saw like kind of the skyline of Vancouver, you'll see like mid rises, but you also see high rises clustered along the transit stops. And why Seattle doesn't really do that, I don't get it. I don't understand that. Especially given the limited amount of roads, given the limited amount of dollars to begin with. And these stations are really, in my opinion, way too big. If you look at, I think it's the first hill stop. Wait a minute. Let me take a look at the transit station. 1 second. Link. I forget the name. Since we don't use it that much anymore, then I forget. I forget it now. Is the transit better in Vancouver, in your opinion? Yes, by far. It's by far better. The Capitol Hill station is one good example in Seattle. Hold on, let me turn this fan. Okay, much better. The Capitol Hill station in Seattle, basically, when that opened, we actually went there and showed you guys the Capitol Hill and the University of Washington stations, right? And the University of Washington station, I can't say anything negative about it. It's actually really awesome. The Capitol Hill station, however, doesn't make a lot of sense. Unlike the University of Washington station, it's just one building that you have to go into for the University of Washington, and you go all the way down to the trains. Capitol Hill has, I think, 3 buildings that you can actually come out of. And why? I have absolutely no clue as to why they do that. And the stations are all built like pieces of art, right? If you look at all the stations, a good comparison is go to any other city, like Denver and their light rail system, Portland and their light rail system, any of those, and you don't see the same type of thing. They actually have transit stops, and we have transit stations. We have a mix, but the last 2 that were actually built, well, I shouldn't say the last 2 because technically Angle Lake is one of the last ones, but the Capitol Hill and University of Washington stations are way overbuilt. Seattle should have taken advantage of the subway plan 69, but then again, I guess, hold on. That was too long ago to predict Seattle will be overpopulated. In your opinion, what's the future of SeaTac area and the prosperity getting out of reach for many middle-class people? Okay, MCK, I agree with you. I think looking back on it, I think that Seattle understands that that was a major mistake, right? Because all that money went to Atlanta, and Atlanta built MARTA with it. And actually, and I did a video about this, but MARTA was supposed to be much, much bigger. And Atlanta scaled it down quite a bit because they thought it wouldn't be used correctly or it wouldn't be used that much. And so they scaled it down quite a bit. And so a lot of the stations, people criticize some in Atlanta. A lot of the stations are just placed in places that didn't make a lot of sense. But the city was just happy to get it. Seattle, on the other hand, had the first option to get that, and they turned it down, said that we didn't need it. They didn't want to be involved with the operation cost of it and all of that, even though the system would have been paid for pretty much fully, right? So that was a major, colossal mistake. Now we're trying to play catch up with this. And some people criticize and say, well, we're using light rail trains instead of subway trains because, obviously subway trains, you can carry many more people on it, right, than these light rail trains. Seattle runs 3 trains. They used to run 2 trains back to back until they opened up the last couple of stations. Now they have 3 cars that they run generally. But they're able to have as many as 4 cars running at one time once they actually get everything done. But the problem with that is that even with 3 cars, people are still standing and they're just crowded in at oftentimes. So the system is being used, especially among more stations, in certain stations more so than others, and it just creates just a huge cluster. Like from University of Washington all the way to International District, I would say, it's just loaded with people all the time. And so it just makes it where it's just an unpleasant ride. And there's really not much that people can do. On the flip side of that, the streetcar project, which the First Avenue streetcar, that is possibly not going to get completed. And what it really does is it connects the 2 disjointed streetcar lines that we have, and it's going to connect them along First Avenue, which is where you're going to run into Pike Place Market and all of that stuff. So right now, there are 2 fragmented lines that really don't do much, right? They carry a small amount of people, but if you connect the 2, then it will allow people to go all the way from the light rail station. The girls are back, so you could probably hear that. It can connect you all the way from, First Hill, and I even mentioned right here before, the Capitol Hill station. It will connect you all the way to that, all the way down through the inner parts of downtown, and all the way up to Pike Place Market, which is one of the biggest tourist attractions that we have. But the mayor, the new mayor, is thinking about possibly canceling that. I know, food's available. So right now, there's the 2 lines I mentioned are basically separated by a little over a mile. I think it's like 1.8 miles, 1.2 miles separates the 2 lines. And to build streetcar, it's going to cost $252 million, right? So they said that's $100 million more than what was mentioned before. So the mayor is possibly going to cancel that. Now, if they cancel it, what's going to happen is a lot of the street work and moving utilities and all that stuff has already been done. So millions have actually been pumped into this project, and if they don't do it. Also, federal grants have been approved for some of this as well, for the actual construction part of it. So then they run the risk of backing out of a project where the streets are kind of already tore up and utilities have been relocated if we don't move forward. My thing is that even if it's at 252 million, that's absurd to begin with for a streetcar line, and we're talking 1 mile. If you wait and don't build it, then if you come back 5 years later and say, yeah, we probably need it, it's going to be like 3 times as much. So you might as well build it now and be done with it. But again, there's a good chance that this may not actually happen. And again, it's kind of similar to what happened back in the 60s, as someone mentioned, where Seattle had the opportunity to do it, and then they just kind of back out of it. MCK, I think... let me actually go in order here. So let me back up. In your opinion, what's the future of SeaTac area with the prosperity getting out of the reach of many middle class people? SeaTac is I did a video there, and again, I didn't publish it, But I did a video there, and SeaTac, if you go there, there's a lot of hotels and things like that, obviously, because you're right by the airport. But when you move out from that, SeaTac is also a city, right? The airport is Seattle Tacoma, but it's shortened for SeaTac. But there's also a town, which is where the airport's located at, called SeaTac. And so the best way to explain this is, I guess, from south of the International District, rents and homes and things like that become much more affordable, right? So south of the city, the core of the city, homes traditionally are much more affordable. So your Rainier Valley area, things like that. Well, Rainier Valley also has the light rail line running through it. It's all street level, and I'm jumping all over the place, but the city learned that by having a light rail line street grade level, it produces a lot of problems. If there's a wreck or an accident, then it affects the entire line, right? So given the fact that downtown and the airport, anything that happens in between there, you're holding up a lot of people who have to get there. So now the city wants to build everything either underground or above grade, right? So similar to what Vancouver has with the SkyTrain, but a little bit different, right? Because they've noticed that having it at grade or on the street, if there's any accident, any major emergency or anything like that, the system literally stops, right? Speaking of the downtown section, which someone had mentioned, it is short, but keep in mind that was actually a bus tunnel. The city felt that it was a much more efficient way to get buses through the core of the city using this tunnel system, and eventually my thought is that they were going to actually have trains running through it. Because if you look at Westlake Station, it looks like, take away the light rail system, it looks like a true subway station. I mean, through and through. But obviously right now you have trains and buses. They're going to get rid of the buses and have trains only, because eventually once Eastlake opens up, which is Bellevue, which is going to be another busy section, they're going to get rid of all the buses going through there, and they have to go up above ground. Let's see. But yeah, in terms of the middle class, yeah, I think they're definitely going to be pushed out of Seattle more and more. The average price of homes there are over the 700 range. Could you get something much cheaper and more affordable? Yeah, you could. But there's always a guarantee that property taxes are going to always go up. They're never going to go down. And the cost of homes are going to go up. I mean, people are leaving San Francisco in large numbers because it's so, they can't afford it. But the prices of homes are not going down. They may creep slowly up and not as fast as they have been, but you're never going to have homes there that just fall. It's just not likely, and that's the same way here. So middle class folks, even though they may have had a home, let's say they bought a home 8 years ago, a lot of people are being priced out because of the property tax increase. The value of the home is going up, it's reassessed differently, and so now the property tax go up. So and it goes back to what I've said before about never getting a home right at the top of what you can afford, but in a happy middle of it, because then if property taxes go up high, it doesn't impact you as much. Some folks, if it goes up by $100 or more, then it stresses their budget out, right? So that's something, and a lot of people want to avoid King County because that's the concern, right? Let's see. So the only 1 mile of subway downtown, that's real smart. Yeah, but also keep in mind, I don't know if you've seen, and who said that? MCK. That's actually changed quite a bit, because really, I mean, you can kind of count the International District as being underground. I mean, it's a cut and cover. And then Pioneer Square, University Street, Westlake, Capitol Hill, and University of Washington, that's all kind of subway. So it's all underground. The rest of those, Stadium Soto, Beacon Hill, Mount Baker, Columbia City, Othello, Rainier Beach, Tukwila International Boulevard, SeaTac, and Angle Lake are all above ground, right? Some of those are at grade, Columbia City and all of those. But then it actually is elevated after that. Good evening. Is it feasible to commute from outside of Seattle, Tacoma via Sounder for work every week, or do you think that would be super expensive? Absolutely not. It is actually a good idea, TraviX. Noelle did that for quite a bit. She worked for the University of Washington in Seattle, and we were living here, and so she commuted via Sounder. And actually, it's not that bad. I have to ask her. Hold on a second. Hey, Noelle.
What?
How much was it to go? How much is a Sounder trip from here to Seattle? $3?
I don't know. I always use my U-Pass.
Roughly.
375.
375. Okay. All right. So I asked her basically a trip up from Tacoma to downtown Seattle via Sounder train is $3.75 a day. $3.75 up and $3.75 back. Excuse me. Now, some employers will pay for your transit. So if they do, that's great. If you work for a city agency, a lot of times transit, they will give you that. The universities, they have like U-Passes and things like that. So they take that out of your paycheck. But it's still cheaper to go that route than paying for it by yourself. And I have an Orca card, which, am I able to get it? No. Hold on. Which a lot of people get, and you just tap it and go on, of course, right? Actually, I touched it and found it just like that. But I'm going to cover up these numbers. I don't know what's more important, so I don't want to show you. But you just tap this, and then you're able to get on pretty quickly, and you just load these, right? It's really, really simple. But yeah, it's pretty cheap to actually use the Sounder train. Some people choose to use Express Bus because it's a little bit faster. Literally, even though the bus has to take the 5 to go all the way up and sit in traffic, even on the HOV lane, it's a little bit faster than the Sounder. I used to live near Atlanta's North Springs. I can tell you some stations are more used than others. Atlanta is a nightmare to travel, even with the limited trains. Travel, it would be worse. Yeah, I think that would be, I couldn't imagine Atlanta without any sort of subway system. That would be definitely a nightmare. Do you see a lot of people living in Olympia commuting to Seattle? I don't know of anyone personally, right? But I do remember the news talking about, the 5, which is I-5, being so crowded that people are trying to find ways to get from Tacoma to Seattle differently. They're talking about having a fast ferry, right? Which is basically a ferry that will cut down the amount of time than the traditional ferries that you see. So the fast ferries will get you there much faster. We're trying to get that to happen because literally the only ways to get there currently is using a car to get up there, obviously. Sounder train, which will take you all the way into the International District. It's King Street Station. So that's through the Sounder. And that's it, right? There is ferry service, but it doesn't get you from Tacoma up to Seattle. It doesn't work like that. So the goal is to eventually get what Bainbridge Island, I believe, they have the fast ferry. Or is it Bremerton, which is on Bainbridge Island? I can't remember. One of those areas has the fast ferry, and it's a much smaller community, and it's doing very, very well. But it was talking about this guy that travels, I think, 2 hours a day. So I think they live a little bit outside of Olympia, and they go to Seattle and they drive it, right? I couldn't imagine traveling 2 hours one way and 2 hours back. Now, this is, of course, dealing with traffic, but driving that long just to get to work and to come back. Now, as it is, taking the Sounder from Tacoma to Seattle will take you about an hour. Let's see. It sounds like gentrification. Is it the tech companies driving up the prices? So you see a housing bubble forming? Rodney, yeah, it is the tech companies, I think, but also I think it's just a lot of other things. Keep in mind, I made this video, and I can't remember when, it was either yesterday or the day before, that a lot of people are hired, Noelle's one of them, hired from out of state. Seattle hires a lot of people from out of state. A lot of people. I have a lot of people comment and say, hey, I got a job at such and such, and we're going to move there at this time, or this company hired me, and I don't know anything about Seattle. Seattle hires. I've never been to a city that hires people, so many people from outside of the city to bring them in, right? So I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of the tech companies bringing in huge numbers of people, and there's a lot of people that still need to be employed. Amazon has a lot of positions that they haven't filled yet still. Excuse me, but they're not the only ones. Microsoft is still doing pretty good. There's a lot of startups. There's a lot of satellite companies as well that pretty much help supply a lot of things for these companies. Amazon, they're an entirely IT company, but they also outsource a little bit too, right? So all of those companies need employees, and I think that drives it up. But also non-tech companies are also bringing a lot of people in. But gentrification in Seattle is real. Gentrification in Tacoma is real. A lot of people are being pushed out, especially if you're a renter. If you're a renter, there's really not a lot of options for you, because someone mentioned in one of the comments their rent's going up by $100 every year. I know of a house close to us that's being rented, and the people are going to have to move because they're increasing the rent on that property by $100, right? So, because the property owner knows that they could easily get it, right? It's not a problem. But for folks who are on a fixed income or people who have just limited income, it's just it's not possible for them. So they have to move. How sustainable is the phenomenon? Well, I think, Rodney, it depends. It depends on how much people are willing to pay. And I think Seattle's reaching that point of where people can no longer really afford it. Because right now the rents are not going up as fast and as high as they were. They're still going up, but not the steep jump like they were. And part of that's due to and you mentioned the bubble, but part of that's due to building a large amount of apartments. And you see a lot of that in Seattle. So that's cooling it off a little bit. But also what's cooling it off is outlying cities. Other cities north and south and east of, and sometimes even west of Seattle, those cities are absorbing a lot of Seattleites or people who have moved there, or people who come to the area and they say, forget trying to even find a place in Seattle. So they come to these other places. So it's cooling off the market a little bit up there. But still, if this was any other city, any place else, leaders would probably be a little bit frantic. It puts a strain on resources. I mean, even Seattle, given the amount of money that it has, the city leaders are stressed to try to figure out what to do with roads that they can't expand anymore. Downtown, you can't expand the roads anymore. There's just columns of huge buildings everywhere. So now they're trying to put tolls up and down the roads to basically limit cars. Even now, there's a road that they're turning into a bus-only access road because buses get clogged downtown. So especially whenever they close the tunnel off from buses, they have no choice but to go above ground. And you can't put all of those buses with all of those cars and expect a good solution. It's just not going to work. So I think that as it is, the city is struggling to figure out what to do with the lack of road space, too many cars, to be honest with you. And even though a lot of people use transit here more so than other places, still there's a lot of cars. They have to deal with issues of home affordability, homelessness, some of the drug issues that are going on. There's a lot of things, and the city just cannot really handle that. We are considering the move, but the prices are concerning. What do you see happening in the region long term? I think that that's a good question. I think that the region itself is going to continue probably for at least for the next couple of years at the same clip that it's going. And I say that because as long as nothing major happens, if Amazon decides to cut back employees here, that could spell a problem, right? Something major like that, like Amazon saying, okay, we're leaving the city, then yeah, I think that it would just be a huge, huge problem. I don't see that happening. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know. But I don't see that happening. I think that in the future, you're going to see more and more. Because keep in mind, there's a lot of startups here, there's a lot of companies that get started up every single day. There's a lot of gaming companies that are here. The games you play on your phone, like Big Fish, they're based out of Seattle. Expedia, dotcom, they're based out of Seattle. So, even with Google is opening up a huge. I mean, there's a building that they're actually going to take over. I think it's in Bellevue. So, Facebook, all of those, they're here. So, I think that it's going to continue. I think that the growth in Seattle and the region is going to continue because a lot of those companies are here to take advantage of the talent. Amazon brings a lot of people in, Microsoft brings a lot of people in, and some of those folks after a while say, you know what, maybe I should start my own company, or hey, I'm really good at this field. I think there's kind of like a glass ceiling. I can't get past it, so I'm going to strike out on my own. And you have a lot of those, right? You have a lot of companies in Seattle, Bellevue, Tacoma, and all the other cities around. You have a lot of startups that get started up because people want to do something different, or they want to achieve something that those companies are not really focused on. So I think that for the foreseeable future, the growth will happen. Maybe not at the same speed and pace, but I think the growth will happen. Keep in mind, too, San Francisco is still going to be extremely expensive. And it's much more expensive in San Francisco than it is here. It's a bargain. Do I think that when you look at Portland's a bargain compared to Seattle? But I think the difference is that having anchors like Microsoft and anchors like Amazon and some of the others, and there's many others, I think that is what makes us stand out and will allow us to continue to stand out, even though Portland is by far much cheaper. So I think the population definitely will continue to increase, obviously. I think the price of homes are going to continue to increase. We just, again, checked, I did a video talking about our home price going up, our value. Noel checked it again last night, and it went up again. So, I mean, that gives you an idea. Here in Tacoma has much more room to grow. We have to catch up to everything else in the region. I mean, if you look at, again, north of here, the prices are pretty high. When you go into Pierce County and Thurston County, which includes Olympia and some of these others, the prices are much cheaper, right? I mean, they're still high, but they're much cheaper. So there's a lot of latitude that can happen. Whereas in Seattle, not so many people can afford that price. Here, $300,000-$400,000 is not that bad whenever you consider $700,000-$800,000, right? My wife and I are college educated, have college degrees, but it seems as if the pricing folks like us out of the region. Have you heard people, feeling this area is becoming out of reach? Yes, I have. Now, it's not as bad. Back in the day when I was going to college, and at that time, it was the dotcom bust, and I was going for a computer degree, which I do have. And it dashed my hopes, right? Because I was looking at moving to San Jose. And then I saw an article where it said that I forget the company, but that employees that work for this company were basically living out of their cars, or they were basically renting mobile homes because they couldn't afford anything. Even though they got paid a lot of money, it was so expensive, they could not afford to live there. And then couple that with the dot-com bust and a lot of companies just collapsing, it scared me. And I thought, well, I got to prepare for something else because, maybe this whole this was back when IT and the whole revolution was kind of, I guess. Because I was thinking like, you know what, maybe this is not going to pan out. Things actually picked up and changed. But I don't think that Seattle is going to go down the same road that San Jose and San Francisco has. I don't think that it will. I think that San Francisco kind of set the tone for a lot of places. And I think when you look at even here, people talk about homelessness and stuff, but even in Tacoma, it's a growing concern. You see a lot more of it. You see a lot more of it in Seattle since we've moved here. So, and some of that could be just due to the fact that people come to a place where it's kind of like the gold rush, right? Everyone comes because there's an opportunity, they think. So it could be that. But I think that the city, Seattle and Tacoma, are trying to do things in the right direction to address that. I think Tacoma more so than Seattle. I think again, it's kind of like the younger kid can learn what not to do based on their older siblings, right? They can somebody else did that and it didn't work, so let me try something different. So I think that really and truly Tacoma's ahead on that because there's a lot more programs going on, housing programs in large areas that they've actually set aside for development. They're doing that over there at the mall, meaning that any sort of big development that goes on as far as residential has to have so much percentage of affordable housing, you know? So I think that Tacoma is much farther ahead. I think Seattle is behind because it wasn't really thinking about that. And also it just grew so fast that it's hard to really address that. They were not really expecting it. Is it cheaper to buy land and build a house versus buying an old place? It depends. It really depends, right? If you bought land in Pierce County, the land's going to be cheaper than it would be in King County, right? If you had 2 acres in King County, 2 acres in Pierce County, it's going to be cheaper in Pierce County. But the price to build is going to be the same. So it doesn't really matter. I think even in Olympia, Thurston County, I think even if you built there, probably the prices would be kind of close to. Building is the price just doesn't really change much. I mean, it's the area. People know. I mean, when we got our actual chimney done, it would have cost the same whether I was in Tacoma or Federal Way or wherever. It's still going to be the same price. So I would say probably buying a older home is your better bet because here's the thing. Older homes, typically people are going to say, I don't want to fix it up. You know, and I go back to what I said in another video. A lot of times people don't want to buy a home where they have to actually come and fix it up. It's not that there's holes in the walls or holes in the floor or bad plumbing or anything like that or leaky roof. They just don't want a home that they have to actually put some money into to make it look good. But those homes are generally cheaper. The older the house, the cheaper it is. And you're able to fix it the way you want to and modify it. Keep in mind that home the value has already been assessed. So your property tax is based on what the city thinks it's worth. Now, you may have dumped a lot of money on the inside and did a complete remodel, and if you sold it, you would get a tremendous amount of money, but the city views that area as a certain amount of money, right? Whereas if you buy a home that's in a wealthy area, you're going to pay generally a heavier price in terms of taxes. If you were to build a home, then they're going to have to assess the value of that home based on what it costs to build it and also the land. So I would say buying an older home is probably the better way to go if you can stomach that and renovating it. Do you know of any good housing options near hospitals? Nick, where? In Tacoma or in Seattle, or where exactly? Because in Tacoma, we have what's called the hospital mile or something like that. I think it's called that. But basically, it's where all of our hospitals are downtown. And literally outside of that are just basically single-family homes. That's in the Hilltop area. That probably will change because the link, which is Tacoma Link, is expanding its system. And that's going to run right through Hilltop. So more than likely, you're going to start seeing a lot of small apartment buildings and things like that go in. We almost bought a house literally right where that line would have been. We almost considered it, but we never did do it. That was actually a year prior to this. Moving towards Seattle, but Tacoma is good too. Let me move this for a sec. Well, here's the thing. When you look at Seattle, it's a different animal because the hospitals are not in a cluster. You know, you have a hospital there at the University of Washington, so anything there is going to be pricey. It just is. You have Swedish Hospital, which is where also they have the what is it called, the streetcar that they've actually built, and you have some options there as well. But again, you're getting into a pricey area. A lot of the kids are back there screaming. A lot of this is due to just the availability of what is it? I'm trying to think here. They threw me off. But a lot of the reason why Swedish is so expensive in terms of just where you live is because you have a lot more historic homes. That's what I was trying to think of in that area. It's becoming more trendy to live in that area as well. So again, if you're going to spend about $1 million for an average home, because a lot of the places like in Queen Anne is a good example, the First Hill area, you're going to be spending, which is where Swedish is, you're going to be spending about $1 million, right? Outside of that, once you go into other parts of Seattle, the price maybe go down to like $700,000 or $800,000. But in those particular areas, you're going to be paying close to $1 million. So again, Seattle's a different animal when it comes to hospitals and where you're living, because all of those are pretty much well-established neighborhoods, and they're highly desirable neighborhoods, right? But in Tacoma, it's a completely different situation. It's the polar opposite. Where most of the hospitals are has been areas where people didn't want to live, like Hilltop. So you run a better chance of getting more bang for your buck, if that makes sense. All right, let's see what else. All right, great to know, and I appreciate it. No problem, Nick. No problem. So let me look up some of the hospitals here in Tacoma so I can give you the names of them. Here we are, right here. Okay, so what they consider as their, I think it's their medical mile. Whoever knows the name of it, put it down in the comment section. But you have Kaiser, you have Tacoma General, which is a well-known one. And you have, what's the other one? Franciscan. All of those are basically in Hilltop. So that's basically St. Joseph. Is that St. Joseph right there? Yep. All of those are within that area. So that's why it's called the medical mile or whatever it's called. And that ranges all the way through Hilltop, where they're going to put the Link Light Rail. Right now, if you were to purchase a home there, you probably are going to be paying a pretty good penny as well, but not as bad as it would be up in Seattle. How easy is it to connect with people? I think it's kind of challenging. In Seattle, it's a little bit more challenging than it would be here, I think. I'm an introvert, as I've told people, so I don't really connect with people much anyway. But I think you have a much easier chance here in Tacoma than you would in Seattle. In Seattle, people kind of are standoffish a little bit, and they're not really that into, from what I've felt, and other people can say the same thing. They don't seem that interested in trying to get to know new people. I mean, if they get to know you, cool, but it doesn't seem like they're out there trying to do that. They're not as friendly. Here, people will wave at you, strike up conversation, say hi, that type of thing. People come over to your house and you're not even asking them to, type of thing. Seattle is completely different. People don't make eye contact there. They try to not even pay attention to you. So I think it's easier here than it would be in Seattle or Bellevue. Tacoma right now is looking a lot like Portland 25 years ago before it popped. I agree, Brady. And I've said that before. Like Tacoma is kind of like Portland's baby brother or baby sister. It's kind of got that whole unique vibe to itself. It's it's kind of eclectic. It's got a lot of breweries and different things like that. So it's kind of like Portland back in the day. I definitely agree with that. Hoping to move to Tacoma at the start of next year. Are there any particular neighborhoods you would recommend staying away from in terms of crime? It's challenging because here's what I've noticed. Even in Hilltop, there are areas of Hilltop which are wonderful. You never hear much of anything. It's quiet. And then there's certain areas where there's issues. Um, the whole city, you're going to have issues with any sort of crime, right? So, I mean, we've had people take packages off of our porch before. You're going to have that. But I've never heard of anything in this area that is like, oh my goodness. But there are other parts of the city where, yeah, that happens. So I can't say that there's one particular neighborhood to avoid. It's more or less like maybe avoid that intersection. Maybe, that section of that particular street, avoid. Is the crime low there? No. If you look at where I live, yeah, I would say it's low. There's parts of Tacoma where crime is extremely low. But Tacoma, based on the stats, has the highest crime rate of any other city in the state. So we have the highest per capita of any other city in the state. Now, keep in mind, most of Washington is not that bad, right? It's not that bad. So even that sounds kind of scary, but when you look at other places, other cities like Indianapolis, where I lived, Albuquerque, by far has much more issues, much more crime-related stuff than Tacoma, Seattle combined. Let's see. I live in Philadelphia and I'm looking to move to the area, though. I know it's way less diverse. How has your experience with police and residents been there being a person of color? With police, no issues. I haven't had, and I can only speak for myself, but I haven't had any issues at all. They seem to be fairly okay. With people in Seattle, again, people kind of avoid you. Now, some people may have a different opinion, but not really anything. Here in Tacoma, not a lot until you go like farther out. Like if you leave Tacoma and you go towards Spanaway or Parkland, it might be a little bit different because, again, most of the diversity in this area is in Tacoma. There's not a lot of diversity in Spanaway and Parkland. I mean, there is now, but it hasn't historically been that way. So it's kind of like more of a newer thing. So people treat you a little bit differently. Not in a mean way necessarily, but people talk about race more. I've been to bars there. People will strike up conversation and then they start talking about, race and racial issues and this, that, and the other. And kind of how they grew up and that type of thing. But it's not like it is back where I'm from. It's not like my hometown of Bowling Green back in the day. Back in the day when I was going to high school, Bowling Green, Kentucky was pretty rough. There was a lot of issues. When I got a little bit older, not so much. Even now, when Noel and I go to Bowling Green, nobody looks at us, nobody stares at us, they're friendly. Nobody even pays attention. There's no weirdness. In Milwaukee, we had more stares in Milwaukee than we had any place else. But in Bowling Green, never once. Here, not so much. But again, the farther you go from Tacoma, you're going to probably get some more stares. But generally, as far as police or individuals, haven't had too many issues. Speaking of cities that struggle, do you think Port Angeles would have any Seattleites coming there? I don't know, to be honest with you. I think part of it is how easy is it to get to Seattle, right? When you are farther and farther away from Seattle and the transit options are a lot more limited, you're less likely to have people that are going to want to move there, right? And when you look at Port Angeles, it is kind of far. There's no interstate that's getting you there. There's no fast way to get there. So I think that probably you may have some folks that do that, but there's other options, right? There's other options that people would consider. So I don't think that it would have. I mean, it's possible, but I just don't see a flood of people moving there unless prices get so bad here. It's so bad in Tacoma that people are like, okay, let's give it a little bit more of a look. But are prices increasing in Port Angeles? Yeah, it's increasing everywhere. But I just don't think you're going to see a flood of people like what you're seeing happen here in Tacoma unless something major happens. Because, again, I mean, there's Everett. So instead of going to Port Angeles, people could say, well, I'd rather live in Everett or Marysville or Bothell or Redmond, which is expensive. Snohomish. What else is up there? Even Whidbey Island. So there's more options than just Port Angeles, I think. You know, I could be wrong, but I would think probably not. Because then you have to rely on a ferry, you have limited road access. I just don't see it. It's a lot of good questions. All right, so anyhow, this has been the longest live stream I think officially I've ever done. Now, if Noelle was here, it'd be 2 hours long, but I'm going to cut it off at 46 minutes. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope I answered as much questions as I possibly could, the best I could. Any other questions you guys can think of, make sure you put it down in the comment section below. I'm going to go actually eat. I know it's late. It's like 9:20. But I'm going to go eat me some pizza and watch a couple of movies with Noe before we go to bed. Hope you guys are having a good, what is today, Sunday? It's bad. Having a good Sunday. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.